We are diving into private land use control, specifically covenants, conditions, and restrictions for the National Real Estate Exam. While the government uses police power for zoning and building codes, private developers and owners use CC&Rs to maintain value, aesthetics, and uniformity within a community. Think of CC&Rs as a set of private rules that are recorded in the public record and attached to the deed. On the exam, you must remember that these restrictions run with the land. This legal phrase means the restrictions are not just personal agreements between the original developer and the first buyer, but are instead tied to the property itself. Every subsequent owner who purchases the home is legally bound by these rules, even if they never personally signed the original document. Let us look at how the exam tests the crucial difference between a covenant and a condition. A covenant is essentially a promise or a contractual agreement to do or not do something, such as keeping a home painted a specific color or keeping the grass under 4 inches tall. If a homeowner breaks a covenant, the remedy is usually an injunction from a court which forces the owner to comply, or a lawsuit for monetary damages. However, a condition is a much more serious legal instrument. A condition is a qualification of the estate itself, often found in fee simple to feasible estates. If a condition is breached, the owner could actually lose title to the property through a process called forfeiture, where the property reverts to the original grantor. This is the ultimate exam trap, where the test asks what happens if a specific restriction is violated. You must differentiate between a neighbor suing to stop a fence build, which is a covenant issue, and a grantor reclaiming land because a prohibited activity occurred, which is a condition issue. Another critical exam concept is the relationship between private restrictions and public zoning laws. You will likely encounter a scenario where a city's zoning law allows for a certain use, but the private CC&Rs prohibit it. For example, local zoning might allow for a detached garage, but the neighborhood CC&Rs strictly forbid any structures that are not attached to the primary residence. On the exam, the rule is always that the most restrictive requirement prevails. You do not just get to choose the one you like better. If the city says you can build a house 60 feet high, but the CC&Rs limit buildings to 30 feet to preserve a neighbor's view, the 30-foot limit is the one that must be followed. This most restrictive rule is a high-frequency exam topic. We also need to discuss the enforcement mechanism. Unlike zoning, which is enforced by government officials, CC&Rs are enforced privately. This is usually done by a homeowners association or by individual neighbors through the civil court system. An important legal defense you might see on the test is the doctrine of laches. This principle suggests that if an association or neighbor waits an unreasonable amount of time to complain about a violation, they may lose their legal right to enforce it. If your neighbor builds a prohibited shed and you wait 5 years to complain, a court might rule that you waived your right to enforcement. To help you remember the hierarchy of these controls, use the phrase, "the tightest tie wins." This reminds you that the most restrictive rule, whether public or private, is the one that governs the property. When you are looking at deed restrictions, always categorize them as private, and remember they are usually enforced through civil litigation rather than police action. Finally, be prepared for questions regarding the legality of restrictions. Even though CC&Rs are private contracts, they are subject to the United States Constitution and the Fair Housing Act. Any restriction that attempts to discriminate based on protected classes like race, religion, or national origin is absolutely void and unenforceable. Even if an old deed from the early 20th century contains such language, it has no legal standing today. Understanding that private rights never override federal civil rights laws is a guaranteed point on your exam.